Welcome to the Business of Government Hour TV, a video companion to our flagship radio program. I'm Michael Keegan, your host. This is a special edition of the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with authors, exploring leadership and effectiveness with Jacqueline Carter, co-author of The Mind of the Leader, How to Lead Yourself, Your People, and Your Organization for Extraordinary Results. What makes one an effective leader, and how can one become a mindful leader? I'll discuss these questions and so much more with Jacqueline. Take a look and take a listen. Download the entire interview at iTunes or at businessofgovernment.org. As you were putting a book together, and I know you and your co-author did a lot of research on this book, but I'm wondering, what are some of the key challenges that you have seen in developing your work that leaders face today?
Yes. It was actually one of the reasons why we wrote the book, because we've been working, with Potential Project, we've been working with leaders for over the past decade. And what we really saw is that over the last 2 or 3 years, that leadership, quite honestly, it's getting really tough to be a leader today. Yeah. And I think any of the listeners can probably relate to this. But a combination of, first of all, we know that the world is changing so quickly. There's not an industry, and it's really quite amazing, there's not an industry that isn't facing some kind of technology disruption. In addition to that, we know that we're inundated with distractions. We're working in environments where we're on all the time, which is actually not good for the brain, which we can focus on in a little bit. But we're inundated with distractions. And also, I think that, we know that in terms of the next generation of workers, they're not necessarily as committed or as loyal as we might have been. I know in my early days, when I started with Deloitte Consulting many years ago, I was so happy to have that job and have that role. And I wanted to stay for as long. I worked late. I didn't mind. And I think now, quite rightly, because I think it's a human characteristic, but workers today, they have a lot more opportunity. They have a lot more flexibility. They can work from their living room and work for any company in the world. So good talent, I think, and everybody knows this. They're looking to say, well, what do you actually have for me? And so I think that we're seeing that in the engagement scores. And you take all of these factors, and in addition to that, we know that a lot of organizations are focused very much on short-term results. So the quarterly earnings reports get a lot of pressure. I think that you combine all of those things, and I think it's just more difficult for leaders today to be successful than it was even 5-10 years ago.
So your book, The Mind of the Leader, explains how, by applying these qualities that you just noted, mindfulness, selflessness, and compassion, first to yourself, then to the people you lead, and then ultimately to your organization, will lead to extraordinary results. I'd like to go through each one of these different mental qualities that you talked about. And first, why is it critically important and almost foundational to understand how you lead and who you are?
I think that when we looked at a lot of leadership development programs today, they will start with external factors, like how good you are at strategy or how good you are at marketing or how good you are at finance, all really important qualities. But it's kind of like building a house and starting with a roof. If you don't fundamentally understand who you are and how you show up, and most importantly, and this is really the mind of the leader gets into how your mind actually works, then you're really missing out on the opportunities to be able to dive deeper into how you want to show up. What is your vision for yourself as a leader? What are the values that are important to you? And based on those values and that vision that you have for yourself of what kind of leader you want to be, how can you actually make sure that you work towards achieving those? And I think specifically for a lot of leaders, what we saw is that what got you here won't get you there. So leaders who are really successful rising up through the ranks in their career, they get to this inflection point where all of those great things that they were really good at, maybe they were really good at, strategy, or maybe they were a creative type, or maybe they were really good at engineering. And when they get put in that one leadership role where now they actually have to get others to be creative, others to be able to develop the projects and tools and systems, it takes a different mind. And so to start with understanding your own mind and understanding your own journey and what you need to do, that's really why we see starting with the mind is the critical path for leaders to be able to develop into the kind of leader they want to be.
Mm-hmm. So, in your book, you come up with the MSC leadership model, as I would like to refer to it. And obviously mindfulness is the first quality. And you talked a little bit about it earlier. But I think it'd be remiss if we didn't delve a little deeper. What is mindfulness, and how does it relate to managing one's attention, and what are the two qualities that make mindfulness happen?
Right.
That's a better way of putting it.
Yeah. So basically mindfulness, the simplest definition is being here now. Mm-hmm. So as opposed to being unfocused, as opposed to being distracted, which is the first quality, so this quality of being focused, being fully present. Mm-hmm. The second quality of being aware. And really what awareness means is I'm aware of what's going on in my external landscape, but really being aware of what's going on in my internal landscape so that I'm not just falling into habits and habitual behaviors. And I'm also, to the extent that I can be, and that's a really important phrase, to the extent that I can be, aware of how I might be driven by ego biases, which you talked about earlier, or other biases, which we know so many of our biases are based on unconscious ways that our brain tells us, that person doesn't look like you, you should be afraid of them. And we have to be able to overcome that. So what mindfulness actually does is mindfulness enables you to be present with your own mind and to be able to have the opportunity to cultivate greater focus so that your mind isn't susceptible to wandering, which our minds naturally wander, but in our workplaces, it's even worse. And then secondly, the mindfulness training, and there's two different types of training that you do to develop focus as opposed to the other type of training, which is to really be able to open your awareness to the landscape of what's going on in your mind.
Mm-hmm. So how is self-awareness almost foundationally, or how is it the foundation of self-leadership? I mean, why is that the case?
Well, and I would say it really probably speaks to both focus and awareness. One, if I'm not focused, so one of the things we talked about and we really saw with the successful leaders is this idea of survival of the focused. Mm-hmm. So as a leader, if you are not focused, and most of the leaders that we met, they were pretty darn good at focusing. But in addition to that, focus is not just about being able to focus on one thing and not multitask, which is a big part of why many people are in
a big problem.
And a big problem.
Point out, which I thought was fascinating.
Exactly. But in addition to that, this idea of mental agility, so being able to shift your focus, right? We talked about the complexity and why leaders are facing such challenging times today. What we really saw is leaders that could be agile in terms of how they shifted their focus. I'm here, now I'm here. That was amazing to us, and I think and it's trainable. So that's really that quality of not just focus, but mental agility. But I would say in terms of self-awareness, the other thing, and just to give you another example of that, self-awareness, one of the other CEOs that we spoke with, Maura McCaffrey, who is the CEO of Health New England, a health insurance agency. And what mindfulness really helped her do is she was able to start to see that oftentimes when she would walk into a leadership team meeting, she would be so enthusiastic about what she wanted to do and what she thought the organization should do that she left everybody else behind.
Interesting.
And so, but she couldn't understand it because as a leader, that is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to bring the vision. You're supposed to bring enthusiasm. You're supposed to bring passion. But her passion bias actually made it more difficult for her to see other people weren't on board. She was 10 steps ahead of them. And the mindfulness training enabled her to, one, realize, okay, that's what's happening. It enabled her to be able to slow down, to speed up, to really be able to take a couple steps back and say, okay, how do I need to show up differently to still get the same outcome, which is getting everybody on board and sharing the vision in a way that's going to be meaningful. But how do I need to show up differently to be able to help them get there so that they can create that journey for themselves as opposed to me just being off in the clouds from their perspective?
Yeah, I want to talk about that because your book is a wonderful combination of insights and practices. So, how did you come up after each chapter? You have, quick tips and reflections, and you have some training practices in the book. It's very practical. How did you come up with it?
Sure. There's two different types of things that we have as takeaways, wanting to make it practical and easy for people to take away things. The first set of things that we have in the book is training tools to be basically able to go to the mind gym.
Yep.
So as we talked about, the mind is plastic. You can train your mind to be able to be more mindful. You can train your mind to be able to be more selfless and more compassionate. And in the book, we walk through, and these are time-tested training techniques. We did not invent them. These have been around for actually thousands of years, and that have been developed specifically to help us develop those qualities. And so those really are laid out. And just to be clear, a lot of them are really simple, and they can be, just 2 minutes to 10 minutes a day of simply going to the mind gym and being intentional about what it is that you want to basically rewire your neural network to be able to change how it works, how it functions, to be able to be whatever it is that you envision yourself as being your best self as a leader. In addition to that, we also wanted to provide some really simple practical tools, because mindfulness, selflessness, and compassion is also about not just who we are and how our mind works, but it's also about seeing ways to be able to bring those into our day-to-day leadership. So, simple tool around mindfulness is, turning off your phone in meetings, right? So that you're not distracted by it. Just, simple ways in terms of selflessness is having a gratitude practice, taking a moment at the end of each day to just say, okay, who are all the people that I know helped me be successful today? And who are all the people that I don't even know that helped me be successful today? And then maybe sending a couple of notes in gratitude. Similarly with compassion, really taking an opportunity and seeing ways to be able to find opportunities to be of benefit to others. And incorporating that, a simple strategy, and this was again from the interviews that we had, leaders that actually said to us when their mantra, when they show up with a meeting with a member of their team, the first thing they say is, how can I be of benefit to you today? So it's simple, but it sets the intention and it makes it actually applicable in day-to-day leadership.
Be sure to join me next time on the Business of Government Hour TV for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation. Until then, it's businessofgovernment.org.